Why did you quit your previous job? I didn't quit in a blaze of glory. I quit in silence because my body finally said enough, louder than my boss ever did. That job had been grinding me down for months. It was the kind of place where every alert felt like an emergency, every mistake felt like a crime, and every day ended with me replaying tickets in my head like a broken song. I kept telling myself it was temporary. I kept telling myself I was strong. I kept telling myself the stress was just part of the industry. Then one afternoon, my chest tightened in a way that didn't feel like anxiety anymore. It felt heavy, wrong. I tried to breathe through it, tried to stand up like it was nothing, tried to finish just one more thing. My hands started shaking. My vision narrowed. The room got distant, like someone turned the volume down on the world. I remember thinking, absurdly, this is inconvenient. That's how trained I'd become. My first instinct wasn't fear, it was guilt. Guilt for not being productive. I ended up in a hospital bed staring at fluorescent lights, listening to machines that beeped with more honesty than any performance review I'd ever gotten. The doctor didn't lecture me. He didn't need to. He asked a simple question. What do you do for work? And the moment I answered, the look on his face changed like he already knew the ending. When I was discharged, my phone was full of messages, status updates, escalations, things I needed to handle. Not one of them sounded like concern. They sounded like obligation. That's when it clicked. If I stayed, the job would take whatever I gave it, right up to the last thing I had. So I wrote a short resignation, turned off my notifications, and watched the panic fade from my body for the first time in months. I didn't quit to prove a point. I quit to stay alive. Next story. At first, I thought my manager was just hands-on. That's how people described them, like it was a leadership style, not a slow suffocation. The reality was smaller and sharper. Every task had to be done their way, on their timeline, with their approval, and with constant check-ins that made me feel like I was being watched through glass. It started with little things. CC me on that. Send me a draft first. Why did you phrase it like that? Then it grew into daily interruptions, then hourly. If I finished something quickly, I didn't get praise, I got suspicion. If I asked a question, it was treated like incompetence. If I didn't ask, it was treated like arrogance. The worst part wasn't the workload. It was the feeling that I could never relax, because any calm moment invited another quick call. My brain stopped resting. Even after work, I'd hear phantom notifications. I'd catch myself rehearsing explanations for decisions I hadn't even made yet. One day I realized my calendar was full of meetings about work I couldn't do because I was in meetings. When I tried to explain that, my manager smiled like I'd said something cute and scheduled another meeting to align. That week, 2 coworkers started venting to me in whispers. They weren't dramatic people. They were steady, responsible, the kind who used to say, "It's fine." Now they looked tired in a way that felt contagious. I held on longer than I should have because I didn't want to be the first to break. Then, during a routine check-in, my manager corrected me mid-sentence, told me to redo something I'd done correctly, and asked me to be more grateful for feedback. I don't know what snapped. Maybe it was the tone, maybe it was the months of pressure, but I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, clarity. I quit with a polite email and a simple exit date. I expected guilt. I expected fear. Instead, I slept. A week later, one coworker texted. I put in my notice. 2 days after that, another. Same. No celebration, no drama. Just the quiet sound of 3 people choosing air over drowning. Next story. They called it an opportunity, which is how companies label miracles they don't want to pay for. I was a coordinator, hourly, low on the ladder, easy to overlook. One morning, I got pulled into a meeting and handed a mission: make the entire operations department go paperless. No budget, no team, no training, just a deadline and a smile that said, good luck. At first, I thought they were setting me up to fail. Then I got stubborn. If they wanted paperless, I'd give them paperless. I stayed late and taught myself what I needed. I lived inside spreadsheets. I learned VBA from forums and trial and error. I built a system that could take messy production floor inputs from different workstation PCs and funnel them into a single centralized workbook. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Then I made it cleaner. Then I made it faster. Then I made it so reliable that people stopped printing forms just in case. For the first time, the floor felt lighter, less chasing documents, less double entry, fewer lost approvals that mysteriously disappeared when someone didn't want accountability. Supervisors started trusting the numbers. Problems surfaced quickly. The department actually ran better. That's when management became interested, not in supporting me, in claiming it. They took my project, renamed it, and wrapped it in corporate language. Suddenly, it wasn't the coordinator's spreadsheet system. It was a Six Sigma initiative, a Greenbelt project, something leadership could put their name on and present like it appeared out of thin air. I thought I'd at least get a seat at the table. I thought I'd be offered training. I asked, carefully, respectfully, if I could get the same Six Sigma education so I could keep improving what I'd built. The next week, I was reassigned, demoted back onto the production floor. No explanation that made sense. No acknowledgement of the work. Just a quiet lesson. Deliver results, and someone else will wear them like a medal. I stood at my station, doing the job they pushed me back into, and watched people brag about the system I built as if I'd never existed. That night, I updated my resume. The next morning, I quit. They kept the paperless process. They kept the credit, but they didn't get to keep me. Next story. I didn't mind working hard. I minded being the only one working while everyone else got to disappear. It started as a joke. My manager would wander off for 5 minutes, and my coworkers would follow. They'd come back smelling like smoke, laughing like they'd just taken a vacation. Meanwhile, phones rang, tasks piled up, and I stayed behind because someone had to keep things from falling apart. At first, I told myself it wasn't my business. People cope how they cope. But then the pattern became predictable. Whenever anything stressful happened, they vanished. If a client was angry, they vanished. If a deadline was close, they vanished. And when they returned, the mess was waiting, usually on my desk. I started feeling like the designated adult in a room full of people who refused to grow up. The scary part was that management never framed it that way. When everything went smoothly, it was the team. When something went wrong, it was suddenly, why didn't you handle this? The pressure built because I knew how these stories end. Blame rolls downhill. The people who disappear are never there when the questions get asked. The person who stayed becomes the easiest target. One afternoon, I watched my manager glance at a new issue, an actual serious one, then lock eyes with me like a silent command. And right after that, they walked away again. I stared at the empty doorway and felt something cold crawl up my spine. I handled it, of course. I always handled it. I put out the fire, documented the steps, and left a paper trail thick enough to protect myself, because I'd learned protection was my job too. Later, my manager returned, calm as ever, and said, "Looks like you've got it under control." That sentence was the final straw, not because it was rude, because it was true. They didn't need to do better. I was doing it for them. I went home, sat in my car with the engine off, and realized I was exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. I wasn't just tired, I was trapped. So I quit, quietly, cleanly. And the moment I did, I felt the strangest thing. Fear, sure, but also relief. Because for the first time when they disappeared, it wasn't my problem anymore. Next story. There's a special kind of frustration that comes from watching someone build a career out of your work. At my company, lean and continuous improvement sounded noble on paper. In real life, it meant a rotating cast of people whose job was to optimize. And somehow, their optimization always involved attaching their name to ideas that didn't belong to them. The first time it happened, I tried to be generous. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe they forgot to credit me. I told myself not to be petty. I told myself results mattered more than recognition. Then it happened again. I'd solve a problem, document the process, and share it with the team, because that's what good teammates do. A week later, I'd see my solution in a slide deck with someone else presenting it like they'd had an epiphany in the shower. They'd use my language, my structure, even my examples. And when leadership nodded and praised them, nobody corrected the record. I started protecting my work like it was evidence. Timestamps, email trails, version history. I hated what that did to me. It made me guarded, less collaborative, less trusting. It turned a job into a quiet courtroom where I was always preparing for a trial nobody admitted existed. One day, a big project came up. High visibility, the kind of thing that could change my career. I did the heavy lifting. I stayed late, I ran the numbers, I solved the messy parts that other people avoided. When it finally worked, I felt proud. Then the lean person asked for a quick summary so they could help tell the story. I sent it anyway because I wanted to believe people could be decent. The next morning, I joined a meeting and saw my work on screen. Not in my name, not even a mention. Just my solution, dressed up with buzzwords, being sold like a product by someone who hadn't built it. In that moment, I didn't feel anger. I felt small. Like the company had decided I was a tool, not a person, someone to extract from, not invest in. I waited until the meeting ended. Then I closed my laptop and sat there, staring at the blank screen, realizing the truth. If I stayed, this would be my life. More stolen work, more forced smiles, more watching other people climb using my hands as a ladder. So I left. Not loudly, not dramatically, just permanently. And the best part? For the first time in a long time, I could create something without wondering who would steal it. Next story. They didn't shout it. They didn't put it in writing. They said it casually, like it was common sense. Work was more important than family. My family should be happy with the paycheck. I remember the moment clearly because it was so unreal I thought I misheard. I'd asked for a little flexibility, nothing wild, a family obligation that mattered, a situation that couldn't be moved. I was responsible, I was transparent, and I expected a normal adult conversation. Instead, I got a lecture. They spoke like my life outside the office was a hobby, like love and responsibility were inconveniences I should manage better, like the money they paid me wasn't compensation for labor, it was permission to exist. I left that conversation with my stomach tight and my hands cold. Not because I was scared of losing my job, I was scared of what staying would do to me. Because if I accepted that logic, I'd be accepting a future where every important moment in my life was negotiable, and every boundary was a betrayal. After that, I started noticing everything. The parents who missed school events because the team needed them. The people who apologized for taking sick days. The way coworkers whispered about family emergencies like confessions. The way leadership praised dedication when what they meant was compliance. I tried to make it work anyway. I told myself I could compartmentalize. I told myself the paycheck mattered. I told myself I was being dramatic. But the sentence echoed. They should be happy with the paycheck. It wasn't just disrespect, it was a warning. It meant the company would always ask for more, and it would always frame my needs as selfish. It meant I'd spend my life bargaining for basic humanity. So I started planning my exit quietly. I updated my resume at night. I saved money. I applied in secret. Every day at work felt like holding my breath. When I finally resigned, they acted surprised. They asked why I was leaving, like the answer wasn't woven into every policy and every comment and every expectation. I didn't argue. I didn't give a speech. I just left. And the first time I had dinner with my family without checking my phone, it hit me. The paycheck was never worth the price they wanted me to pay. Next story. I knew something was off long before I found proof. It wasn't paranoia at first. It was pattern. My boss always seemed to know things they shouldn't. Not big public things, small things, private things, like whether I'd stepped away from my desk for 2 minutes, like the exact moment I'd stopped typing, like who I spoke to and for how long. They'd mention details with a smile as if we were sharing a joke, and I'd laugh politely while something inside me tightened. Then one day, I caught a weird reflection in a dark corner, a tiny glass eye where no glass eye belonged. I told myself it was a sensor, a piece of equipment, a coincidence. But once you see a question mark, you start seeing them everywhere. I started scanning the room without meaning to. I started feeling watched even when nobody was nearby. The suspense wasn't dramatic. It was slow. It was the creeping realization that I didn't feel safe in my own workspace, that my body was always slightly braced, like a noise could happen at any moment. I waited until after hours and did what I never thought I'd do. I looked behind things, under shelves, along the edges where wires disappear. And there it was, small, hidden, angled in a way that made my skin crawl. My first thought was, maybe it's illegal. My second thought was worse. Maybe everyone knows and I'm the only one pretending it's normal. I took photos, I documented, I double-checked because I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining my own nightmare into existence. And the more I looked, the more I found. Coverage like someone designed the room to be a trap. The next morning, I didn't confront my boss directly. I went up the chain, asked calm questions, watched faces shift in real time. People got vague. People got nervous. People tried to soften it. It's for security. It's for safety. It's standard. But the cameras weren't pointed at doors. They were pointed at people. That's when I knew the truth. I wasn't an employee there. I was a suspect. I resigned quickly after that. No long notice, no extended debate. I took my things, walked out, and felt the air change the moment the building was behind me. It wasn't just a job I left. It was a place that turned trust into surveillance and called it normal. Next story. I became a middle manager thinking it would be hard, but manageable. I'd been tired before. I'd handled pressure. I'd led projects. I thought I knew what stress was. Then I had 2 babies under 2. And somehow, that was easier. At work, stress didn't end. It multiplied. Every day felt like juggling knives while someone asked why I wasn't smiling. I was stuck between executives who wanted miracles and staff who wanted support I didn't have permission to give. I couldn't make anyone happy, and I couldn't admit how impossible it was without sounding negative. My phone never stopped. My inbox refilled faster than I could empty it. Quick question messages came in like mosquitoes. Meetings about problems we couldn't solve because we were too busy meeting. The suspense wasn't a single big blow-up. It was realizing slowly that the job was turning me into someone I didn't recognize. I'd flinch when notifications lit up. I'd snap at small things. I'd lie awake rehearsing conversations I was terrified of having. When the babies arrived, I expected chaos. And yes, there were sleepless nights, spit up, endless laundry, the kind of exhaustion that sits in your bones. But there was also something the job never gave me: honesty. If a baby cried, it meant they needed something. If they slept, it meant peace. The rules were real. The love was real. The effort mattered. At work, effort disappeared into a void. I'd solve one crisis and get 3 more. I'd stay late and still be behind. And the feedback was always the same. We need you to step up. One morning, after a night of broken sleep, I got the babies settled, kissed them both, and walked toward my computer for another day of middle management misery. My stomach sank like I was heading into a storm. Then one baby smiled, half asleep, trusting, safe. And I realized something that scared me. I was more afraid of my job than I was of raising 2 tiny humans at the same time. That's when I knew I had to quit. I didn't leave because parenting was easy. I left because the job was crushing, and I refused to give my best years to a system that only rewarded burnout. I chose the hard thing that still felt human. Next story. The biggest shift in my life didn't come from a raise or a promotion. It came from having enough money saved to say one word without shaking. No. Before that, negotiations felt like performances. I'd pretend to be confident while calculating rent in my head. I'd nod through unreasonable demands because walking away wasn't an option. It was a threat to my stability. They knew it. I knew it. and that imbalance quietly shaped every conversation. So I started saving, not glamorous saving, the boring kind, cutting subscriptions, skipping purchases, building a small cushion 1 month at a time, the kind of discipline nobody claps for. But every dollar I saved felt like I was stacking bricks for a door I could eventually open. At my job, I kept doing more. More responsibilities, more urgent tasks, more weekend requests framed as teamwork. When I asked about compensation, they praised my growth and promised future opportunities. Future, always future. Then came the meeting. They wanted more from me. Again, a bigger workload, more accountability, same pay. They presented it like a gift. You're ready for the next level. I listened calmly, asked questions, and watched them dodge anything concrete. I felt the familiar pressure, the old fear that says, don't mess this up, you need this. But something had changed. I didn't need them the way I used to. I asked for terms that were fair, real compensation, real boundaries, real acknowledgement. They smiled like I was adorable for trying. Then they pushed back, hard. They implied I should be grateful. They hinted I was replaceable. The suspense was internal. My heart beat fast, but my voice stayed steady. I felt myself standing at the edge of the cliff where I used to freeze. Then I said it. No. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just no. Their faces shifted. Suddenly they wanted to revisit. Suddenly they had options. Suddenly the conversation softened, and that's when I understood the rule. If you can't walk away, you don't have power. You're negotiating with a leash around your own neck. I didn't even stay to see if they'd improve the offer. I realized I didn't want to work in a place that only respected me when I was no longer desperate. I resigned soon after. Walking out felt like reclaiming something I didn't know I'd lost, my ability to choose. Next story. I didn't notice the change right away. I thought I was just tired. I told myself everyone felt drained in this field. I told myself I needed to toughen up. But after 6 months, I was different. I worked at an MSP, and every day felt like getting dropped into someone else's emergency with no map and no mercy. You weren't solving one system. You were solving 12 versions of the same chaos, each with different rules, different expectations, different ways to get blamed. There was no stable rhythm, only constant escalation. At first, I tried to be the hero. I tried to be fast. I tried to be perfect. I tried to prove I deserved the job. Then the stress started following me home. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying tickets I'd already closed, terrified I'd miss something that would blow up in the morning. My jaw ached from clenching. My patience thinned. My appetite disappeared. I began to dread the sound of my phone. Even when it didn't ring, my body acted like it might. One morning, I sat in my car in the parking lot and realized I didn't want to walk inside. Not in a lazy way, in a deep physical way, like my instincts were trying to protect me. I finally admitted it to myself. I wasn't coping anymore. I wasn't pushing through. I was unraveling. I spoke to a doctor and for the first time said the words out loud. I can't shut my brain off. I can't breathe. I can't sleep. I feel trapped. Medication helped, not like magic, but like a life raft. And that's when I got angry. Not at myself, at the job, because I realized I'd normalized a workplace that demanded so much it was literally changing my chemistry. The suspense ended one evening when I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Pale, exhausted, eyes dull. I looked like someone I would have worried about if it were a friend. So, I quit. Not because I was weak, because I was finally strong enough to stop sacrificing my mental health to a machine that wouldn't even notice I was bleeding until productivity dropped. Next story. The nightmare wasn't one big disaster. It was 1,000 tiny rules that changed depending on who you were talking to. At that job, every line of business had its own scripts, its own procedures, its own allowed fixes. Some users I was only permitted to reset passwords for, nothing else. Other users I could troubleshoot almost everything. The difference wasn't technical, it was political, and the rules weren't written in one place. They lived in tribal knowledge, scattered documents, and people's memory. To survive, I kept an absurd number of tabs open. Tabs for policies, tabs for scripts, tabs for which remote tool to use, which ticketing system to log into, which form to fill out so I wouldn't get blamed later. I'd be mid-call, trying to sound calm while my brain raced. Which version is this? What am I allowed to touch? What do I say so QA doesn't flag me? My team supported 12 lines of business with 3 different ticketing systems and 3 different remote access tools. Sometimes I'd open the wrong system, and it would cost me time I didn't have. Sometimes I'd follow one rule and get punished because the caller belonged to a different category I couldn't see until it was too late. The suspense wasn't dramatic. It was the constant fear of stepping on a landmine you didn't know existed. I started double-checking everything, then triple-checking, then hesitating so long that I'd get criticized for being slow. But when I moved fast, I'd get criticized for being careless. It was a trap disguised as productivity. One day, after a long stretch of calls, I realized my shoulders had been up near my ears for hours. My hands were cramped, my head pounded. I hadn't taken a real break because breaks meant falling behind, and falling behind meant drowning. The breaking point came when a simple request turned into a maze. The user needed help, but the policies said I couldn't help in the way I knew would fix it. I offered what I was allowed to offer. They got angry. My metrics took the hit. Management told me to handle customers better. That's when I understood. The system was designed to protect contracts, not people, not users, not employees. We were all just collateral. I left soon after. And the strangest part was how quiet my mind became when I didn't have to remember 12 versions of reality at once.